Hello and welcome back to Call Center Helper. My name is Xander Freeman, and today we're talking all about our latest research once again. I'm delighted to be joined by one of our chapter sponsors, Steve Blood, VP of Market Intelligence from Five9. Steve, great to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you again, Xander. Been a while.
I know, I say it's been a while. I honestly couldn't tell you if it's been 1 week or like 3 months since I last saw you. That's just the way this year has gone. But it's
Very good.
But it is lovely to see you again. And again, I cannot wait to dive into some of this data with you. You guys sponsored the CX specific chapter of our
Yeah.
research. So we're going to base most of our questions around that. But I suppose to begin with, what wanted to ask you was what jumped out to you from the wider research?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, and one thing that didn't, so I want to talk about that as well. But I think, just looking across the surveys, speed and scale
Mm.
kind of came out. I think we're at the point now where, this isn't a gradual change anymore of evolution. It's, dare I say, revolution. I think we're going to see this major shift, because I think, digital certainly, AI especially, is really, I think, starting to make those differences. And I think, overall, I'm going to be sort of a little bit contrarian, I guess I'm going to say it does beg the question, if you're betting all in on AI, what's the smallest size of company that you're going to do business with? And that just brings me back to my Gartner days when I spoke to clients. They were always concerned
Mm.
about, the size of the company. Are they viable? Are they big enough? And so on. So that I think that's one thing. What I was really pleased to see was staff matter more than ever.
Mm.
That is so important. The human plus AI, the collaboration. We've been preaching that for some time. We've always believed it, and I think this survey is just bringing that through. Other surveys have said the same. So why is it that we still have the pundits suggesting that AI is going to take jobs en masse? I mean, it's just getting boring, isn't it? They have to think of something else from that perspective. So, I'm delighted that your survey pulls up on that, especially. I think also that the shift in employee feedback as part of
Mm.
that customer feedback piece. Now, that's interesting because if you think about the role that these staff are going to take on,
Mm.
more engaged in defining the design and the experience, because obviously AI is going to do a lot of the more mundane work. It's important that they are involved in that. So I thought that was an interesting piece. And then just finally, the bit that I thought was missing, and maybe this wasn't the questions weren't asked, but it didn't get really brought up in some detail for me, is the lack of focus on trust and governance. So observability, that's the new word. That's how do you observe and manage and monitor the performance of especially generative AI, but agentic solutions in general. And if you're going to get scale, that's going to be really important. So that's the bit that didn't come through much to me. There were lots of sort of, mentions about it, but it was missing, I felt.
No, and I think that's a fair reflection. I mean, me and the rest of the editorial team at CCH did have that conversation when we were going into it. We chose to,
Right.
I mean, let's be honest, when we came to the conclusion of the research paper, you're looking at 85 pages in a
I
PDF. At some point, we
know.
had to cut something, and we felt like the
Yeah.
appetite for talking about compliance and governance there, whilst
Yeah.
important, we've tried to eke it into our editorial calendar
Yeah.
throughout the second half of 2025, and I think you'll see a lot more of that from
Great.
2026 onwards.
Yeah. Super. Yeah. Yeah.
But I'll
Super.
tell you one bit that you mentioned there that I want to dig into a bit more is
Mm.
feedback. You're 100% right about the employee feedback as well. I always scratch my head whenever I look at the research there and I think, oh, why aren't people using employee feedback more? Especially if you look at it like the frontline agents are the people in the trenches. They're the
Right.
ones that know
Right.
exactly how you're being perceived. And I think customer feedback in general, or let's say how we look at
Mm.
feedback, is due for an overhaul. And I think you're starting
Yeah.
to see the first signs of that at the moment. I mean, one of the questions from the CX chapter was the traditional sources of customer feedback started to decline a little bit in the sense of email, website surveys, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a good thing?
I think the question really is, what's the benefit of it? I mean, obviously it's been a very traditional way of measuring NPS and so on, but I mean, do they make any? I mean, people are bored of doing them, first of all, right? There's so many of them. And then the other piece of that is, well, do they make any difference?
Mm.
Does the customer that fills them in actually see any change? So I think from that perspective, it starts to get a little bit sort of tedious. And so, yes, certainly, the number of surveys. Again, we've seen this through other surveys that consumers, customers are really getting a bit fed up with doing those sorts of surveys. And I think also, they're so loaded, they're scripted. There's no room for free form entries and things. And so, I mean, I still do them. I did an EasyJet feedback the other day because it was a good experience. But it didn't really give me much space to sort of say where they could have made improvements or anything specific that I felt was wrong. So it's really just going through the motion. So I'm not surprised that people are getting fed up
Well,
with answering those.
I think quite crucially, if you look at where we're at now, I think there's a better pathway to be doing that. I've always thought when you look at the traditional sort of sources of customer feedback, they're very good for getting either end of the spectrum, but
Yeah,
everything in the middle tends to get a little bit lost. And I
yeah,
think if you look at what certain companies are doing right now, that you can really see the really interesting cases into this is how you get a far more complete view of feedback and how you're
yeah.
being perceived by your customers. And I think that's systematic of where you've seen that decline. And like I say, as our research shows.
Yeah, agreed. And in that research, the bit I was really delighted to see was the 100% increase in the use of speech and text analytics.
Hmm.
Because I've been saying for a while now that the true voice of the customer, the authentic voice of the customer, is what takes place in those conversations, whether it be a phone call, whether it be a chat session, and so on. And companies historically have struggled to take that data because it's been locked away and it's been difficult. But these days it's much easier to do, and obviously with modern technologies and generative, it's much easier to surface that data. So I think I would just say it's got to double again next year. It needs to be 50, 60%, something in that sort of order. But I do believe that we're on the right track there, and companies are just going to when they do this, they're just, oh my God, they're going to understand so many things that they hadn't thought of, or have things that will confirm, perspective and so on. And you build that into the employee feedback as well. Then I think, we can go so much further now with technology to do a better job on customer feedback for sure.
No, I couldn't agree more. And then I suppose let's pivot into looking at sort of maximizing ROI when improving CX. That was a major element of the CX specific chapter. Self-service dominated the results there. Did you expect to see that?
I did. I was disappointed, but yeah. The thing is, it's so tangible, right? It's self-service. It means you're not using a person to answer this. Therefore, da da da. We can work out a saving. But the truth is that every again more surveys, 60 to 70% of consumers say they wanna do things with self-service. But the kicker is they want to do it on their terms, and I think that's the disconnect, right? So if the focus is operationally we want to save money, we're internally focused on using self-service. That's why all the bots went wrong,
Hmm.
right? Companies were building them for them, not for their customers, and so the consumers or they just don't get the value out of that. If you flip that and said, what do our consumers want from this?
Hmm.
If we build for that, then actually we are going to achieve the ROI in terms of self-service, but we're also going to do much more, which is improve the customer experience. So, that whole question, so much was focused on self-service, whether it be websites, whether mobile apps, chatbots. And I think we're missing the, sort of if we were to say, well, maximum value for money, what if it was loyalty and retention and potential growth? That could be enough, but those don't fit the sort of this easier to define, more tangible cost savings as a result of self-service. So, I think, there needs to be some work on that to improve those areas. But really, from our perspective, it is flipping that round and saying, let's look at this from the customer perspective.
Hmm.
If you deliver something that works for them, they'll use it, and guess what? You'll get your ROI on self-service, but you'll also get an improvement in CX, which which of course is the number one reason we hear as to why anybody invests in technology, right? To improve CX.
Yeah, but I think it's also self-service falls victim to, and I think the same could be said of customer experience as well, as it could become a catch-all term of
I know,
you can
yeah,
put anything under
yeah,
self-service if you
yeah,
really stretch it far enough. But I
yeah,
think that's where it'll be really interesting to see how this information compares when you and I skip ahead 12 months and
I
go,
know,
right, how has it changed there? Like you were saying with what you want to see from the customer feedback question, I'm
yeah,
really hopeful that we'll start to see more of this evolve and hopefully break down into those slightly different microcosms as we go forward.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah, no, absolutely, totally agree.
And then I suppose let's talk about chatbots then. You mentioned it a
Mm.
little bit before there. I'm convinced at this point, like I say, it is the technology we love to hate to a certain degree. It's
Yeah,
also, I think, when you were talking about where to deploy self-service and you're looking at it from a customer perspective, like why would they want this?
yeah,
I think chatbots are, if nothing else, the best example of that at the moment because we're so guilty as an industry of trying to implementing them from our side rather than what the actual customer wants. I think when chatbots are deployed in the right way for the right purposes, they're great. And you can see that reflective of the
yeah,
customer satisfaction scores
yeah.
per channel when they're done in the right way. When they're not, you get a very different story.
Correct. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So what I liked in there was Vinay Palmer absolutely nailed it. We need a shift. I wrote this down because I'll never remember it. What we need is a shift from this efficiency first mindset to a more experience driven approach. Absolutely spot on. And I think, that will be, the real driver that will make a difference here, whether it be a chatbot or a more conversational, more complex conversational self-service mechanism. That's what we definitely need to look at. And the strange thing is in that data it said, oh yes, customer feedback. It's like up in the 70%. So important, and employee feedback as well. But um, it's really important, but it doesn't seem to impact how you design how come some companies are designing some of the services that they're actually creating. So I think that's a bit of a disconnect, I think, from that perspective in the research. It's almost, oh yes, it's really important to say that customer feedbacks, yeah, yeah, okay, we've done that. Now we're going to build our chatbots based on cost savings and so on. So I think, if we were to use that data's there, it's gold, and it's going to get better with voice of the authentic voice of the customer. Now you can really start understanding what are the use cases, what do our customers want to do. Let's build for that. And then we'll get success.
Mm.
And then we can go with another business case back to the company saying we need more money because we're going to do some more here. I think that's one of the problems. We have seen this. Gartner saying that generative AI is going to slip into the trough of disillusionment because they're just not seeing the return on investment on some of those initiatives. And I think a lot of it does come down to how it's being measured or not, as the case may be.
Well, I think you've segued me really nicely onto my final point here, which was 84% of our audience either having already implemented or considering implementing AI
Yeah.
in their operations within the next year. Obviously, you're in quite a unique position, both with your history with Gartner and also
Mm.
with what you're doing with Five9 these days. There's so many different directions you could take this, but let me boil it down to one simple question. What advice would you give to end users that are either choosing to start down that journey or looking like, where do I begin? I mean, you've almost touched on it there by, again, going a little bit smaller rather than just
Yeah.
taking it for a lot, but please take us away.
Yeah, I think it's really starting with a clear business outcome.
Mm.
The outcome could be we've got to save money on customer service. That's a bit drastic, and maybe that's where the business is. But the business outcome could be something bigger. It
Mm.
could also be something smaller, like, yeah, we do want to shave 20% off of the duration of these engagements that customers, that's a perfectly reasonable business outcome. And then you can start measuring it from that perspective. I think the problem that we have here is that, oh, shiny object. Let's jump in and try and build something from that. But we have the data. The data is emerging to help us understand what are the areas that we would need to focus on, and then pick those projects. Start small. I was speaking last week in London again about the use of generative AI, sorry, voice-based bots.
Mm.
And one of the audience, he said, we're doing it. We're actually using voice-based, and it's quite advanced. They said, but we started out 100% of calls went into the bot, and 100% got deferred out to employees. That's where we started.
Mm.
And I thought, oh, this is great. And he said, we improved it. And as we
Mm.
got better and better, we were able to, and they're down to like 30% are now contained. And I think that's realistic.
Yep.
None of this 90% rubbish that we hear from proponents trying to sell their technology. Sorry, but it's true. So, this was a great example. And I think that's important, getting that balance right. So starting, the style of the project and things and taking into account what customers will want. So I think that's really, really key. I think I'm going to go back on the people bit. Um, there is a need to retrain staff for a
Mm.
human AI collaboration environment. Last week or 2 weeks ago, Cavell did a webinar on their agent experience survey.
Mm.
Now that was North America based. The European one's going to be coming next, but they were saying minimum of two-thirds of the reps feel they're ready to train and supervise AI systems.
Mm.
So I think that's, I think there's a lot of work that needs to go into that to ensure that they can do that effectively. They need the skills. But this is actually quite a step forward from where we were a couple of years ago, where employees saw this very much as, oh my goodness, it can take my job, and where I don't want to use this, and so on. So I think that's that's good. But there does need to be the focus on the employee programs and how those things get introduced. I think also when it comes to especially to generative and training large language models with your own data, companies are underestimating the amount of work that's involved there.
100%.
That is massive, and and this is I was talking with one of the guys at Gartner recently, and said that yeah, they just don't allocate enough resource, and consequently they only ingest a small amount of the library or the Bible. This is how the company runs. These are all the policies and things, and so therefore the bots aren't as effective. So they have to get that bit right, and I think that's not so. So what that means, I think, is yes, it comes back to starting small.
Mm.
Start with some small projects from that perspective.
But it's also, I mean, I'm going to focus on that last point because it's something
Yeah,
I talk about so much these days. It really drives me up the wall that no one wants to talk to me properly about knowledge management, but everyone wants to talk to me about AI. What do
yeah,
you think you're putting into those models? Like you just said, you put
yeah,
rubbish in the front end of an LLM, you're going to get rubbish out the back end. But
absolutely.
again, knowledge management specifically within that, it's not just a one and done situation. It's like an employee. You have to take care of it. You have to set time aside for training. You have to set time aside for coaching. You have to make sure it's going well. And I think that can sometimes get forgotten when it comes to planning these projects, especially if, like you said earlier, your start point is you need to save money. It's
Yeah,
not the nicest story, but it is something that does happen. When you
yeah,
start on that project going on for twice as long as you originally planned because you didn't set aside the time to
correct.
do the data is setting you off on a bad foot already. And it's
Absolutely.
being clear at the beginning of the project, outlining your objectives, like you said, is a
Yeah,
really good example of what you can
yeah.
start doing today.